That's the foundation of language learning. To try an oral language is one of the levers of learning a new language. And together with this concept of needing to rehearse the language comes also this pedagogy of justice that needs to happen where everyone's voices are equitable, important in these equations.
Maria Oliveira Friedland is the Senior Director of Social Studies, Civics Curriculum and Instruction for multilingual and English learners in New York City public schools. In this capacity, Maria works closely with central offices, district teams, and educators of multilingual learners to design, plan, and deliver professional learning opportunities and curricular resources that address the needs of K-12 linguistically diverse learners. With over 20 years of experience as an educator in New York City and abroad, Maria's educational leadership and teaching practices have always been directly connected to serving multilingual English language learners and immigrant families. Welcome to RBERNing Questions, a professional learning podcast where we answer your most compelling questions about teaching, serving, and supporting multilingual learners. I'm your host, Jasmine Coaxum, and through our talks, I look forward to bringing the methods, philosophies, and stories behind teaching multilingual learners to light. Let's get into the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the RBERNing Questions podcast. Today, our guest is Maria Friedland, and I actually met Maria at one of the Nice TESOL conferences, I believe. That's where we met. And last year, actually, I went to your presentation and I took a handout from that presentation, and I was like, wow, this is actually, it was more than a handout. It was like a booklet that was really going into depth about project-based learning and this event that you actually put on, which I had the pleasure of attending. So we will definitely talk more about that event and what it took to put that event together. But before we go into that, Maria, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your current role in education at this time?
Good morning, everyone. And again, thank you so much, Yasmin, for the invitation and for really staying true to this work with me since you attended the session. Again, my name is Maria Oliveira Friedland. I am originally from Brazil. I have been in the States for over 23 years now. And it has been an incredible experience as a learner and as an individual, as a teacher, just being part of the NYC public schools as a teacher at first, as an educator, and in my current role as a senior director of social studies and civics for multilingual learners within the Office of Multilingual Learners in New York City.
What inspired you to get into this field in the first place? Everyone has a unique story, so please share yours with us.
Thank you. I started to teach back in Brazil when I was actually 17 years old. I went to what we call in Brazil a vocational high school. It's called Magistério in Portuguese. And I started to teach as I was going to high school then. When I finished high school and I got into college, I have a BA in geography in Brazil, and I continued teaching there. So I always interested as a geographer in geopolitics, language, ethnic studies. So when I came here and I learned about TESOL, which I already knew about TESOL back in Brazil because two of my sisters are linguists in Brazil, in Bahia. I'm originally from Bahia in Brazil. So I was interested in learning about TESOL and becoming a TESOL teacher in New York City. So I really started my teaching career here in New York, up in Washington Heights, which was an amazing and very rich teaching experience for me. In my year one as a teacher, actually, I present at the National Board of Education on how to actually teach vocabulary to multilingual learners in a more thematic way. And in that sense, I have always been interested in how to teach language through themes, which I think is part of our next conversation, I hope.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, let's go ahead and dive into the event that I recently attended, which you pioneered, and it's called PBL with ELLs in Mind, Collaborative Culminating Event. So I'm just going to read a little bit about the goal from the pamphlet that I got. So the goal is to transform classrooms of ML and Ls and their peers into inquiry-based collaborative communities that engage in deep comprehension, disciplinary and interdisciplinary learning, and reasoning through solution-oriented projects. And there's a whole agenda with keynote speakers. This year's keynote was Tatiana Klein, who I also had on this podcast with her colleague Daniela Alulema of the CUNY Eye Project. And then there's a project exhibition gallery walk, an art tour, an educator panel, and even some student awards. And I have to say, one of the most interesting parts of this event for me was listening to the students talk about their experience with this project. There were a couple of students that were nominated to come up and talk about experiences, and one of them was just like so articulate and animated, and I was just like, wow. And it was like a little kid. What was he? I don't know. He looked to be maybe in the third grade, fourth grade, something like that, and he was just so excited about the whole thing. So just please tell us about the origins of this wonderful event.
So project-based learning with ELLs in mind really originated as a concrete project back in 2019 when I partnered with the Tenement Museum in New York City. The Tenement back then created a small unit called Migration Immigration, and really portrayed the histories of communities, different communities that lived within the tenement. So it seemed like every 10 years, a different group of immigrants or migrants lived within the tenement, moving from first the Jewish community, then the Puerto Rican community, moving towards the Asian community, and so on and so forth. And I was able to actually have access. They opened their entire archives to us back then. And I was very interested in exploring and learning about these different families. For example, there was a family, the Saez Velez Puerto Rican family, who moved to the tenement. And there were some oral histories of how children speaking as adults now about their experiences in New York City public school system back then, explaining how their experiences in the public school kind of impacted bilingual programs back then, and how there was a push, and Jose, one of the adults, then a child in a public school system in the Lower East Side in New York City, sharing about his experience in New York and how his mom was actually able to fight for bilingual education, and how he had to come back home from school and he had to do his homework, and how the teachers back then didn't allow him sometimes to use what we call now translanguaging, and so on and so forth. And that really intrigued my curiosity to delve deeper into all the ways of, in all the content areas, in all the text, all the type of experiences that we call text in learning a new language. And that was the genesis. We also invited 25, I think 30, and then we stayed within 25 teachers in New York City to explore different ways that we could actually make learning more welcoming to multilingual learners, more collaborative, more sustaining, really reimagining the learning experiences. It's interesting because it also coincided with a period in my career, Yasmin, that I had back then worked already as a what we used to call TDC, Teacher Development Coach. There was a period when I left teaching, and I was in charge of 19 schools. 12 of them were high schools, and I actually noticed during this period how detached English learners were from the subject areas. Really totally trying to fade away, trying to not exist, or inside looking out by default. So when I joined the Division Multilingual Learners, I already had my leadership credentials, and I was interested really in dismantling this way of learning, where as the state was calling for the integration of language and content, when teachers began to integrate two subject areas, ENL, English as a new language, and a content area. Teachers really didn't know how to do this. And also I noticed that the content they were integrated didn't really reflect the students there in the classroom. So they took the content as it was and tried to merge with English as a new language. So it resulted in an experience that didn't really reflect the diversity that we have in New York City, which I claim in the book that I think you mentioned here, the guidebook, that the integration of content and language needs to be done through a culturally and linguistic responsive way. And I think that's what NYSED is calling for, as well as New York City. But the how to do it was, still in the air back then between 2018-19. So that's why I think setting teachers to investigate the how to do it together with us was so important, instead of telling teachers what to do. So we invited them to discover together, explore through research and through evidence-based learning how to do so.
Now, you did a talk called Amplifying Multilingual Voices and Learning in K through 12 Education Through History and Civics. This was for last year's National ISEA. I don't know if that's how you say that, ISEA conference. And ISEA, ladies and gentlemen, stands for the Elementary, in case you don't know, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So I'm just going to read a little bit of this description. The New York City Department of Education Division of Multilingual Learners will present the outcomes of a 3-year collaboration with educators, scholars, community-based institutions, and organizations featuring language literacy through history and civic engagement. So I got the impression that this PBL with ELLs in mind project or event came out of that 3-year collaboration. Is that correct?
That's correct, exactly. So from this engagement and collaboration with the Tenement Museum, other organizations began to reach out to us because everyone all of a sudden wants to be part of it. So the Smithsonian Museum reached out to us, the National Portrait Gallery, Voice of Witness in California, the CUNY Dominican Studies Institute, as well as the Arab American National Museum, El Centro for Puerto Rican Studies, Museum of Chinese and American, and they all made their archives available to us. In some cases, they even donated pieces that they had already put together so they could make the voices of this ample and diverse community that we have in New York City and abroad, I want to say nationwide, kind of part of the mantra through which we build curricula. So I began to actually collaborate with a lot of these institutions, organizations. We set professional learning for over 2,000 teachers back then. For 2 years, we trained teachers, and we continued this investigation around what was a model of learning that could be collaborative, could use culturally responsive and linguistic responsive content through which students could learn language, in this case, English as the new language. It also coincided with the period that I was also involved with the civics work, and through our collaboration with Civics for All in New York City, we also began to see the work of what we call actionable projects that involved the communities from which the students come from. So tackling national global problems or global issues at the local level. So it really resulted in what we call now amplifying multilingual voices through project-based learning. So that is an entire guidebook dedicated to this work. And we also put together what we called project-based learning with ELLs in mind planning tool. Through this culturally and linguistic responsive resources that we built in partnership with these organizations, and through a language model that was actually developed in partnership with Dr. Luciana de Oliveira, which I think you're also familiar with.
Yeah, she was on the podcast as well. Yes.
Yeah, nice. Woohoo!
So there are a couple of things that I would like to piggyback off of. First of all, in the guidebook, this booklet, there are a couple of quotes that I feel really speak to what you were saying earlier, especially about the curriculum and students seeing themselves in the curriculum. And that is a quote from Gloria Ladson Billings that is in this booklet. And the quote is, "All instruction is culturally responsive. The question is, to which culture is it currently oriented?" And this is why it's so important for students to see themselves represented in their classrooms through curriculum, through reading materials, and in multimodal ways to affirm their cultural identities. So I love that that quote was part of the booklet. And then something that you mentioned earlier as well, in terms of seeing that the English language learners or the multilingual learners were in a way silenced, right? Or like towards the back in content area classes. And so there is a quote by Oliveira and Uccelli, I hope I'm saying that second name correctly, that's in the booklet as well, which says, "Moving away from pedagogies of silence towards pedagogies of voices." And I feel like this project, this event that you put on, it definitely was moving in that direction of voices. And I just want to share with the audience my particular role in this event. So I participated in the roundtable activity, and my role was as like a voice partner. And so I want to just tell the audience a little bit about what that means and what the roundtable activity was. It says that this activity will provide MLs and Ls with an opportunity to demonstrate content knowledge and academic skill sets through PBL projects in a safe and inclusive learning environment. And I'd like to emphasize the words safe and inclusive, and the way you promote this inclusiveness, Maria, and whoever else was behind this, is by setting norms for this activity. And some of the norms that you set for it were: be positive, kind, and respectful, focus on ideas and welcome multilingualism, challenge ideas, not the person, show support and celebrate each other by snapping, not clapping. And this was all in a handout, a really great handout that I received as a participant in this activity. So I just want to say that this handout was incredible. It really laid out valuable talking points for the L voice partners, and that there was just a really smooth continuity to this activity. And not only were the norms listed, but you also had the method of feedback that should be used after each student's presentation. So you had tag, tell, ask, and give. This handout also provided a question bank with general questions, questions specific to the research aspect of whatever project the students were going to be presenting, as well as some empowering statement stems. So this handout I felt was just really a great way to ensure, as I said, like a smooth flow to this roundtable portion of the event. So first, I would love to know really who put this lovely and thorough handout together. And I also, well, that's what I want to know first, and then we'll go from there.
That's an interesting. I'm so happy that you're there in focused and also collaborating and giving your voice too, because it's so about voicing. We know to learn a new language, we need to try that language. And unless we hear voices, they're learning that new language. That is no learning. That's the foundation of language learning. To try an oral language is one of the levers of learning a new language. And together with this concept of needing to rehearse the language comes also this pedagogy of justice that needs to happen, where everyone's voices are equitable, important in this equation. So when setting learning or setting any types of activity, I always have this concept in mind. And policy is only valuable if it's in action. And it comes from the work of Kate Mencken. Dr. Mencken says that policy in action, and that I takes that very seriously in terms of how can I make everything that I do, all the professional learning opportunities, all the events, in a way it's organized and structured so that everyone can have access to equity in their voices, right? So it's all about amplifying voices. And also, I think that resonates with the quote that you read before, where it says, all instruction is aligned to a culture, but which culture is that, right? Unless we shift that in the classrooms, unless we shift that in the work that we do, and within everything that I do, I want to model that to really reach out and create that agency in learners. We need to center them. We cannot center folks who are not in that classroom. We need to center folks who are in that classroom, in that event, in that Zoom call with us. Otherwise, we lose ground and we lose attention. It's about being able to spark the need to learn. And that's how the resources for the event that you keep mentioning. So the event is really a culmination of a year-long partnership with New York City teachers. The school year before, 22-23, was the piloting phase of the Amplifying Voices through PBL, when teachers first used our PBL with ELLs and MLs planning tool. There were 32 schools back then, and we are able to actually pilot the tool. And there were different teachers trying different things. That was so successful that we moved towards year 2 in a scale-up way. We scaled up, we invited all first-year schools to join through year 2, and those schools became the guiding schools to guide the other ones. Some schools, and I want to highlight some schools like Mackey High School on Staten Island, they adopted all other schools on the island to showcase how this work could really happen school-wide, or as simple as in the standalone classroom, or could be by content area, could be by department area, or school-wide. Mackey went school-wide, but they also adopted and they brought in two other participating schools, hand in hand, showing them how this work could take place. It's really about centering students. There was a kid, and I remember, I think she shared that during the culminating event, that when she first came to the US as a New Yorker, she couldn't really see herself speaking at all, but through PBL, she became this great student that she was back then at home, but she didn't know how to be that great student here in the US. And then project-based learning gave her a stage for becoming. The same thing, the same type of feedback we heard from kids in third to fifth grade in PS 88 in Queens. We actually invited a few students who participated prior to the culminating event on May 28 back then. So we met with them on May 22 this school year. And there were some important leaders there with us back then. Elisa Alvarez, Associate Commissioner for Bilingual Education, Mrs. Sanchez Medina, Chief of Multilingual Learners, and Superintendent Cacavalli from District 24. The entire school leadership, the principals, and the students were there saying, one kid shared within a school year, this past year, he had been through 4 schools, moving from where he came in Europe, his country was facing a war, 2 schools there, and then 2 schools in New York City, and that was his second school in New York City within a school year. But that's the only place where he felt he could exist as a student, and he became this idea of becoming in America, schooling beginning to happen for them in America through project-based learning, through this collaborative way. And when he brought back home the project he was beginning to work with a group of other kids in his classroom, his mom said, wow, there were 2 kids there interviewing. This kid said his mom is a scientist coming from Europe. And another kid said his mom was an app creator who created the first food app that became the app used in the entire country. Through project-based learning, their parents were also becoming recognized, one as a scientist, another one as an app creator. Their parents all of a sudden also gained ground through this work because the kids could say, they brought this idea back home. The parents said, oh, I like the way you are learning here because as a scientist myself, or as an app creator, or as a professional myself, I see myself recognizing this work as well. So parents no longer just that suffering immigrant going through a lot of struggle, but also we could see that the parents had a history, a lived journey as a professional that sometimes is not really, that is not even space for that type of conversation to exist. So all these leaders could see that these little kids letting us know now with the language they're learning through this project who their parents really were. And sometimes immigrant families we see in the media a lot of labeling. And this helps to dismantle labels as well. So the kids were so proud of themselves. And I could see, and I'm happy you were there with us, Yasmin, that day during the culminating event when we had over 34 schools represented. We have about 50 students from grades K through 12 representing and presenting their projects. They all work very hard to put their trifold posters and PowerPoint together, all really contextualizing and presenting their projects. Projects diverse. There are so many diverse problems. They're tackling global problems, enduring issues at the local level. There are kids proposing sustainable ways of how to tackle water problem on Coney Island. There are kids proposing how to change the lunch menu that they had and how to make this more sustainable. There are kids proposing how to make newcomer centers in New York City so newcomer students could feel that there was a place for them to actually become kids again. And also, there are places where they could fight trauma, engage in mental health practices as well. There are kids proposing what a house outside of a shelter could look like for them in New York City, like the dream house. There's so many different topics and projects that all coming from the kids. Their own topics, their own themes, their own projects, proposals, and a winning project through participatory budgeting with the Civics for All team. Each winning project received a small budget to make their project come true.
Oh wow, I wasn't aware of that. That's fantastic. First I want to thank you for sharing a lot of those proudest moments. I'm assuming all of the stories that you just shared, those were some of the proudest moments of bringing this event together and seeing it come to life. And I want to say, I particularly remember during this roundtable activity, there was a part of it where you could just walk around to other tables. So we were assigned tables, but you could walk around to other tables before you listened to the presentations at your own. And I was just walking, trying to get a feel for what was going on. And one of these students said, "Hi, would you like me to explain this to you?" And I said, "Yes, I would definitely like that." And so him and his partner had designed this space for students to be able to come together and support each other, to do their homework together. And it was just, okay, he explained what it was. And then his partner who was sitting, so he was standing, explaining via poster. And then the partner at the table had a laptop and had some kind of like 3D simulation going of what it was going to look like. And he indicated to her to press the button and show it. And it was just, their enthusiasm about it was fantastic. And I really just loved it. So I am wondering if you can provide some advice now for other educators who might want to put an event together that really resonates with their passion in this field like you have. So just maybe the nitty gritty of how to even get this kind of event put on, maybe some first steps, things like that you can provide for the listeners.
And thank you again for coming back to the roundtable activity. It's really, just to finish on that, is that activity is built really so everyone has an opportunity to have a voice and to share their experiences, present their projects. And in the afternoon that day, we also had a few kids who actually were able to do front stage presentations. So moving from this more accessible grouping where everyone could more at the table level share and feel comfortable and safe to share, to opening an opportunity for the brave ones, the braver, I want to say, who actually can present to the whole room in a front stage manner. And a lot of the kids did. They wanted to present up front and use all their linguistic resources to use. One of the kids actually presented the project in a dialect spoken in Mexico, a Spanish dialect. She was wearing her entire attire that represented her culture back home in Mexico. So she was making herself at home at Tweed Court House wearing her own attire and representing high school through her project. All that to say, Yasmin, that when we first started, we started very small. There was no much investment and belief around this work back then because it was so new, and I really had to partner with external partners at first to really gain more ground. So I didn't really know what to do at first. There were a lot of organizations reaching out, and I really to actually pause and see within my office who else could partner with me. That idea of not moving alone, but moving and lifting others. And a colleague who actually was director of secondary mathematics, she was interested because she had a lot of knowledge around PBL. And she joined me, and together we kept doing this work. She's now serving in another capacity. But I think she was the first person in my office to give more credibility to this work. So together we continued this work. So my advice for anyone who is trying something, but the credibility or the belief system is not there yet, only because your project is so small at the very beginning, my advice is stay true to your vision. Your vision will become clearer and larger as you go, but if you stay true to your vision, to your core beliefs as well. So that's for me was key in making this come out as something more sustainable, which became part of Maria trying this with a group of 25 teachers, became now a strategy, a city-wide initiative for the Division of Learners. So my advice is stay true, and through your beliefs, stay true through your vision for it's the power of I don't want to call Lenny Marine, who joined me as the director of mathematics back then, as a follower, but it's the power of the first follower. When you have someone who you can lift and move together with you, then you have something there. And sometimes, even if you don't have the buy-in of your team right away, you keep building. Like they say, keep building and they will come. So keep building. I knew this was powerful when I saw that New York City teachers were so into it, so interested. Whoever came stayed through the year, straight to the second year, stayed with me throughout the years. They're partners now. They are with us since 2019 when we started with the Tenement Museum. So it's really a testimony to the belief system and growing yourself. I grew a lot as a human, as an individual, as a woman, as an educator. And I think this needs to be collaborative. I depend on experts like you. I depend on experts like Dr. De Oliveira. I depend on New York City teachers. I depend on my colleagues as well, the Division of Multilingual Learners, on my own leadership. I think it gotta be collaborative. It's gotta be collaborative for students, and it must be collaborative for us as well as professionals, one lifting the other.
Wonderful. So I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. And I want to make sure that if any of the listeners want to follow your work, to follow what's happening with this event so that they could attend next year's event, where can they go to find out more about what you're doing, any upcoming projects, etc.?
We are now about to publish a second edition of the Amplify Multilingual Voices. All the resources produced with these big partners that I mentioned before, these organizations, are now going to be not a link, but as embedded in the document. We also about to publish a second edition of the PBL planning tool. And very soon you'll begin to actually invite schools, districts in New York City to join us for cohort number 3, which will be the third cohort of this initiative. We also in conversations with colleagues from ISAD now. I just met the other day with Dr. Jordan Gonzalez from BOCES as well. I met also with Elisa Alvarez and her team, and we are trying to also make this available to colleagues statewide and making connections not only with New York City now, but with folks from New York State. So we gotta come together as a larger community now.
Okay. And oh, yes, our final question for today, which is what burning question should today's educators consider in order to improve their service to the ELL community?
A question that I myself keep going back to over and over. It's all about access. What access looks like in my context in New York City, but I think a burning question for all the teachers is what access could look like at your local level. When you re-engage with the community, when you go back to the communities that you work with, keep asking what makes the community engaged, because that's where the access exists. So that's the burning question. Keep going back to the community and keep asking that question. How does this community really engage? Because it's this idea of, instead of home language and schooling language, we got to bring school and home together. So keep investigating, keep going to this question, what access could look like for this community, the community that you belong with, you work with. And that's, to me, that's the key to moving forward.
Wonderful. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Maria Friedland, thank you once again for talking to us today on RBERNing Questions.
And thank you, Yasmin. Thanks so much for this opportunity. I'm looking forward to reconnecting with you and everyone here.
Thank you for tuning in to RBERNing Questions, produced by Mid-State RBERN at OCM BOCES. If you would like to learn more about today's guest or any of the resources we discussed, please visit Mid-State RBERN's webpage at ocmboces.org. That's ocmboces.org. Join us next time, where we hope to answer more of your burning questions.